I would like to welcome you, Professor Waterman, to the Kaizen Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. This is outstanding. I always love to hear from my alumni, all my ex-students. It's really fantastic. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for taking the time. I would like to first do a little introduction. I first met Professor Waterman when I was in the Capstone. Paul. I met Paul when I was a senior at GCU, and I remember you being one of the most impactful teachers to me because of the way that you ignited something in me that inspired me to want to know more about the world, not through what everybody else was telling me to do, but more from an internal standpoint. So that's something that I think is super valuable and something that I want to share with the world today. And you always have that. There's always something, like the things that you say just click so well with me. And I know other people will find this valuable as well. What I want to talk about today is some of your philosophy on strategical thinking in regards to personal growth, personal finance, also taking into account different strategies you can employ into your personal life that will impact your future and maybe even make it better. And if we could even inspire one person to take the reins back and start making decisions based on what they truly believe in, that would be more than what I could ask for.
Awesome. Well, if you recall in class, and I'll probably refer to that a bunch because that's our connection, one of my favorite sayings is enjoy the ride. And in some ways it forces you, and I talk about jumping out of an airplane. So when you jump out of an airplane with a parachute, hopefully, you might as well enjoy the ride because there's nothing in that 1 minute you're falling from 12,000 feet, there's nothing you can do to impact the outcome except for to worry. And if you're worried, you're not enjoying the ride.
Exactly.
And life is that way. I mean, personally and in business, all these things really fit together, but we're on this journey and you might as well enjoy the ride because there are things inside your control and outside of your control, which is why strategy is so interesting because it applies to everything.
Yes.
And if you want to, if you're thinking about what that ride might be or how you want to improve it or think about your life, be strategic because it's not hard, it's fun, and there are lots of really helpful tools. So.
Yes, and one of the things that I remember talking about in your class was Sun Tzu and the philosophy of how it's super important to know yourself first.
Right.
That was my introduction to what it meant. And you said, know your weaknesses because the battle's already fought, like before it's even fought. It was something like that. Could you give that insight again? Right.
Well, Sun Tzu, there's a section of Sun Tzu's book. Sun Tzu was a Chinese general 2,500 years ago. And the book is written about military maneuvers. But in the military world, strategy is the most significant because it has the highest stakes. If things don't work out and you're in a war, very bad things happen. And so those people up through today think very deeply about strategic things and they do a lot of planning. So it has a lot of corollaries, has a lot of alignment with how you think about life, even personally, individually. Yeah. So Sun Tzu says if you know yourself, well, if you don't know yourself and you don't know the enemy or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, right, your competitor or a relationship you're trying to improve, you have to abstract a bit of what apply in the context that you want to apply this stuff. If you don't know yourself and you don't know the enemy, you're going to lose all the time. If you know yourself well and you don't know the enemy, you're going to lose half the time. If you know the enemy and not yourself, you're going to lose half the time. And if you know yourself deeply and you know the enemy well, you need not fear 1,000 battles. And so in another part of Sun Tzu's book, he talks about an excellent strategist does not enter a battle until victory is assured.
Exactly, that's what it was.
And so when you think about that, you realize, how do I improve because that's what strategy is about, right? Maybe in a minute I'll take a step back and talk about a working definition of strategy. But when you are facing hundreds of different challenges in your life, in relationships, you're facing challenges with jobs, you're facing challenges with friends, whatever it might be, those are all different, okay? And so in order to maximize the impact that you're trying to make in any one of those, any one of those situations, you would have to take the time to know everything about this other person. And it doesn't have to be military, right? It could be just a successful outcome with my clients or with my podcast viewers. Like I really want to have valuable content for them, which means you have to understand them deeply. And that takes a lot of time. However, we can all endeavor to understand ourselves deeply from the get-go.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I sense in the world today don't want to do that. Because we live in an Instagram world and everything is, look at my beautiful hamburger and aren't I pretty and aren't I handsome and aren't I funny and it's not real. And so, and that's okay to put that foot forward, but it's not okay strategically for you to not understand where you're faking it till you make it and where you're hoping it works out and where you're taking a risk. You really want to know your strengths relative to your competitors and your weaknesses, and you don't have to share it with anybody. Yeah. But it's a bit scary, I think.
It's very difficult.
And I'm talking from personal experience. When I was a young person, diving down, it affected me pretty profoundly for probably 6 months or a year. My family and my friends were like, hey, Paul, are you okay? And I just really started to think deeply about, like, what am I here for? And what am I really good at? And what challenges what do I want to be good at, but I'm not really as good as I try to convince people that I am. Yeah. And that gives you something you can work around. It gives you something to improve, and it gives you something so that you can battle plan for your engagements with whoever it is you're trying to strategically compete with, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, of course.
So if you truly know your weakness, you're going to battle plan around the possibility that weakness get exposed, and you would have a less ideal outcome.
Yeah, but it's because right now what I feel from people is that they have a difficulty exposing themselves to the unknown, because nothing in that spot that you were at, I believe when you said that you were younger, you don't know the next step forward because there's so many possibilities, and within that there's that lack of control in a way. And until you start asking yourself the hard questions about what your weaknesses are, as ugly as that may feel or seem, you're never going to be able to take the right step forward, or even a step forward, even in the wrong direction, to get to know yourself. So
true.
Yeah.
So my working definition of strategy, do you remember it?
Oh goodness.
Probably not. I won't put you on the spot.
No, I was going to try and think of it, but no.
So the one that I like, and I didn't invent any of this stuff, I'm sure I got it somewhere, but I really like it because it's pretty broad, is the art of planning and deploying constrained resources under conditions of uncertainty to achieve a worthy goal.
Beautiful.
Now, the reason I like it so much is when you take it apart, you really kind of understand what this journey really is. It's an art. Now, as an artist, you can also be a scientist. So as an artist doesn't mean, in the business context, we're at the business school here, you have to know the science of accounting and the science of finance and the science of management and leadership. Those are all sciences. But an artist is the person who knows how to leverage those combination of sciences.
How to
so
orchestrate
there's no right answer in this, okay? So that's the art, planning and deploying constrained resources. That's really important. So if you don't have constrained resources, you don't need strategy, right? But what resource do we all have that forces us into a strategic game? Time. Yeah. Everybody. It doesn't matter if you're Elon Musk or if you're Paz. We all have time. And so that's a constrained resource, and we have to decide how are we deploying that resource. Okay? Because that's strategy. Now, and you have to have a goal. If you don't have a goal, directionally speaking, you don't know
where you're going.
when you have to make a choice between deploying your time or your friends or leverage or influence, whatever you have that's your resource. In business, it could be assets on your balance sheet, but people have resources too. When you're making that decision, you have to know directionally which direction am I going? And if you don't have a worthy goal, you simply can't be strategic.
Yeah, because
And
you don't know
so-
where you're aiming at. As you said, you
Right.
told me about like whether you're going to New York or you're going to, which one was the other one?
Right.
Boston.
Yeah, or you're
Yeah.
going East Coast, West Coast.
Yeah.
You have an idea, I'm going to go left or I'm going to go right. And it's not saying, well, let me take a step back. Under conditions of uncertainty, that's key. Because we all want to win in the future, and the future is unknowable. So we're talking about crystal balls here. And so I think many young people want to only be right.
Yeah, because it's an aspect of control, and if you're not right,
And
then
we-
you're wrong, and that could be
Yes.
bad. But is it really bad?
Well, we've created a system where you get rewarded for being right. You get rewarded for getting a good grade on a test. You get rewarded for memorizing something that's a science. But strategy is an art.
Yeah.
And so you have to be okay. You have to embrace ambiguity. Like you have to get comfortable with ambiguity if you want to be strategic. Because the winning is, no one spends any time, and no worthy person spends any time trying to figure out how they could have won last week. Because last week is done.
Yeah, it's gone.
Now it's the future. And so you have to be able to embrace the fact that, okay, I'm dealing with something that hasn't happened yet. There are all kinds of things outside of my control. There are things potentially within my control. I know my strengths and weaknesses. How do I want to game this out? How do I want to think about approaching this?
Yeah.
Right? So the uncertainty factor is really big. And I think successful people generally, it's hard to say this, overarching, but they're okay with failure. I mean, they're okay as long as you learn from it.
Yeah.
Like they're okay trying things, understanding the consequences probabilistically, but you want to always learn from those things because no one wins every day.
Yeah.
There is nobody, there's no executive of any company, there's no person on planet Earth that simply wins every day.
Yeah, so you can't really play it safe even, basically.
No,
Like what I'm hearing in summary is you have to be okay with taking the risk, not feeling safe in the moment for the sake of progress, for the sake of an advancement of some sort of new piece of information that you can add on to your strategy
Right.
and make that into an art form, which is what life is about. You can apply that to anything, right? Relationships.
Absolutely.
career.
And once you're aware that there is a science, if you will, called strategy, and there are all kinds of frameworks that help you, that put you in a position where you are forced to view the world in a certain way, that you may find helpful information. It doesn't give you the answer, but it forces you into a perspective,
Yeah.
because the tool is there for you to look at, that is likely, if you know how to use the tool, it will help you understand those things that you do understand, and it'll make you aware of things that you don't understand. And you can always do something about those things you don't understand.
Exactly. One step.
And you don't want to constrain yourself only to doing things where you know the answer.
I think that's where most people want to stay comfortable in, because it's the known, the safe.
That's right. And,
Yeah.
and as soon as you're the manager of one other person, or as soon as you're in a significant relationship with somebody, those things are now out of your control.
Yeah.
So
That's
you might as
huge.
well, it's just first principles, right? If you understand what this is about, you immediately default to a position of, okay, this is important to me. I'm going to spend some of my resource on it. How do I learn more about the nuance of this thing? What do I not know? And it actually makes you quite paranoid if you're not careful. Head on a swivel. Remember I talked about that a lot?
Yeah.
Because everything is interconnected. The world is like mind-numbingly complex. It's complicated, but complexity is different than complicated. So complicated means there are lots of parts. Complexity is different. Complexity theory is different, and that is when you look at any part, it doesn't help you understand the whole. And life and relationships and the world and business is, it's complicated, yes, but more nuanced, it's complex. So there's second, third, fourth order impacts. And so when you deal with people, you cannot predict all of the outcomes. So you're thinking about communication channels, you're thinking about people's lives and the things that are going on with them, if you're running a small business. Like, it's a very complex thing.
Yeah.
And so you have to be very humble. So humility is a big part of this.
Yeah.
Because you realize, try as you might, you will never understand, you never know the answer.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot wait till you know the correct thing to do.
Yeah.
Because in the complex world, you talk about a pebble you could throw a pebble into a pool and it'll make ripples. But complexity is random pebbles falling in, making waves that are interacting with each other. And it's very hard to understand how that all works together.
Yeah, so almost finding comfort in knowing that you will never know.
Right. And so when you get there, you become very skeptical, and in a way that's good. I call it I don't know if you recall, being a happy skeptic. Like, question everything, because when you start pulling layers of the onion back, you will find interesting things that you never even knew existed.
Yeah.
And all of those learnings, all of those opportunities, all those insights are what make you different from everybody else on planet Earth. And that's what gives people value and meaning in their life, is how are they different?
Yeah.
Like, you and I could look at the same plant, we're not seeing the same thing, because we've all had thousands of millions of interactions and emotions, and everything that we've ever done is part of how we see the world. And the world is not the same for any two people.
No.
And we can all access the science, and we'll talk about AI perhaps. We can all access the science equally, but we cannot assess the science equally.
Wow.
That's a function of
course.
the work you've done to polish yourself by paying attention to things that make you different in a valuable way.
And how would one start, according to you, to polish that, to formulate that inner, I think you told me about the kaleidoscope, right? Where you line
I talk
things
about
up.
the kaleidoscope all the time.
Yeah, and I love that, because you need to explain that concept to me again, because I remember, like, the inner world, that's how I picture it. The inner world is one part, but then there's the outer world, and you could create anything out of that.
Right. So I have a bunch of things I talk about to help young folks who haven't been fortunate, that just haven't had the experience to think about these things abstractly.
Yeah.
And one of the things I talk about is a kaleidoscope. And if you all know from being a child or whatever, and there's some very sophisticated kaleidoscopes, but every time you dial one of the dials, what you see is changes.
Yeah.
But the kaleidoscope that is your life is hundreds of dials.
Yeah.
And every time you learn something, and this gets into strategy and environmental scan, every time you learn a piece of information and you put it in your worldview, because you've chosen to, you've chosen to pay attention, not just let it be information that impacts you. Because we're all bombed with information, just bombarded with information. The question is, which information do you choose to place and think about as it relates to everything else in your life?
Yeah.
And every time you do that, you're dialing, you're changing your kaleidoscope a little bit, which means you will never, if I look at your face and turn around and learn something new, and I look back, you're not the same person anymore, because now I've learned something that may change how I think about things. And so it's a constantly evolving thing.
Yeah.
And the only real crime here is that people choose not to do it because they're afraid of uncertainty.
Of course.
And so, I know successful people that have had a hobby that turned into an unbelievable life because they pursued that thing with gusto because they cared about it. And it could be riding a bike, or it could be art, it could be anything. But learning that thing changed how they looked at the world, and now they get back to some daily thing and they realize, boy, maybe I could do this to help somebody that I really care about improve their business. And sure enough, it helps them.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have that hobby, it wouldn't have changed you in a way that would have given you a perspective nuanced enough to have an insight that might help that person.
Yeah, and that's something that I've kind of understood in the past even month or so, things don't necessarily have to be linear. Like sometimes we get so caught up in this needs to happen so this can happen and that's the only way that could happen, but you never know what you could pick up along the way of a completely random experience that's going to get you to where you want to go. So if you have the aim, then you just have to follow almost like a desire or like your passions, and that will lead you to put things together in a complete unique way that's particular to you.
That's
to
right.
reach what you want. And that's not common. It's rare. Why do you think that is?
It's because it requires a little bit of discipline and some thinking. Right?
Critical
you have
thinking.
to think. Right. If you say, "Hey, I want to have a career in accountancy," okay, great. What do you think a great accountant is going to look like 5 years from now? Now, you can't be right.
Yeah, you're not going to be right.
You're not going to be.
Period.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Like that's what you know for sure. You can't be right because you're reading the crystal ball. And so, and then you have to say, well, this gets back to one of the tools and strategy that I love so much, which is the environmental scan.
Yeah.
Is that you have to look at the world and there are technologies and shifts and socio-political things and legal things happening and movements. All these things are happening simultaneously in a very complex world, and all of them have an impact on the future. And so it's kind of a dirty word, conspiracy theory, but strategists love it because that's the game we're in.
Of course.
We're trying to take data points, validate the veracity of this information, which is another step that I think young people need to kind of lean into more. Just because you hear it doesn't make it true.
No.
Right?
See where it comes from, the source.
Yeah, you have to look at it. And then you have to say,
funding.
well, let me find someone who thinks the opposite. Now, if you don't go through that exercise, you can't really advocate, or I wouldn't suggest you make decisions that are impactful, important in your life based on information you've picked up randomly that you have not done any work to try to figure out if it's true.
Yeah, with the opposing viewpoint. I think
With the
that's
opposing-
very key.
Right.
Because then you might understand something that you otherwise wouldn't have, that might change the initial perspective.
Absolutely. And
Yes.
and so when you say, hey, I want to be a great career path, if that's what you're thinking about, that requires work because now you have to say what technologies are going to change? How is business going to change? What are people going to ask from me? And if you're a young person particularly, you want to be very in tune with those things because those change very rapidly now with the digitized world and AI and all those kinds of things. It happens very fast.
Yes.
And most people don't see it until it's already happened. Well, strategy is, I talk in class about a Hail Mary pass. That's what strategy is in some ways. Yeah. Like you have a plan that these position players are going to run down in the end zone and the quarterback is going to heave the ball up. And if everything works according to plan, it's a low probability play, but they've planned it out. So if you're thinking about your future, you decide what's important for me, and everybody's different. And then you have to try to look at all those trends, and that takes research. It takes curiosity is really what it is. And so, I like to try to motivate my students to be really excited and curious about everything.
Yeah, in regards to trend analysis, and that's what I learned. That's a skill that I learned in your class specifically. You said, look at everything that could possibly impact this situation. And even when I was in your class, that's when COVID started. And you're the one that said, this is gonna change your life. Like this random virus that happened in China, we never knew what was gonna happen, but you were the one that called it from the beginning. And then sure enough, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks later, we never came back to school again. Like we went online. You said this is gonna change your life, and it did. It changed in a magnificent, like an extraordinary way in so many different ways. So trend analysis.
So what is that? So what was that? That's interesting. So the easy, cheap answer is experience, but it's not helpful particularly because. If you're 20 and I'm 20 years old, we both have 20 years worth of experience. That's not the question. The question is, what did you do with that 20 years? What kinds of things did you pay attention to and focus on? And how is that polished your brain and the way you think and your style? Like, so these are long-term things that over time, these parts and pieces fit together. So when that first happened, I would say I was pretty naive, Pollyanna-ish about the world until probably 9/11.
Okay.
And when 9/11 happened, and not getting involved in some of the other, why it did or what it did, but the reaction that people had to 9/11 was they pulled out the Patriot Act, which had been pre-written, and immediately started taking your freedoms, okay? And so the world changed in a drastic way on 9/11. And I started to think, boy, and I had quite a bit of experience internationally, and I'd seen quite a few things which changed how I looked. I mean, I was primed to look at the world the way it really is, not the way we're taught it to be, if you will. And that would be a different podcast totally. But
love to talk about that one day.
So when something like that happens and you see this major shift and you see people in power, the political power or elites, how they deal with that, it was pretty obvious. And this is psychology and how do humans react to certain things. And so this is not things that you would normally think some business professor would be thinking about. But that's what adds a lot of the uncertainty to everything you do, or the people side of it. So you could be the greatest financial whiz on planet Earth, but if you can't try to understand the impact on people, and so that's psychology and all these other things. And over the years I've done some deep dives. But so that happened, and then in 2008, when the financial crisis happened, and I saw day after day after day the news media talking about how this was too complicated for you little people to understand, and they just, months on end, they talked about how complicated this was, but don't worry, they're going to solve the problem, and we're going to do this, and we're going to bail out these people and those people. Well, my background is finance. And so I understood exactly the deal, and I thought to myself, how long would it take me? Maybe it might take me a day to put together a 30-minute infomercial that I could have anybody reasonably educated would totally understand this perfectly. And then you realize that's not their interest. Those people do not want you to understand it. They want to put you in a position of fear and reaction. They want you to react to stuff. Because when you do that, they can help you.
And that you're easily manipulated at that point.
You're easily manipulated. And so when COVID comes along, I could see it like 10 million miles away. There is no chance that they're not going to take something, notwithstanding who caused it, like that's a whole nother issue. But the fact that this thing popped up and was out there in the world, how are the people in power going to react to this? Well, they're going to grab it and they're going to change everything.
Of course.
Because I had seen it several times. And so it was really obvious. Now, at the time, a student who had been 2 when those things happened and 10 when those things happened, they just hadn't had the time to put those into their worldview and see how it impacted their business or their parents' business or their significant other's business and freedom or things you care about. I happen to care a lot about individual freedom. But because I had a structure and a format using an environmental scan, and every news bit that hits me that I think that might be important, I have to fit that into my view of the world.
The kaleidoscope.
The kaleidoscope. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so I fit it in somewhere, and that means it doesn't just hit me and go away. It hits me and becomes part of the texture that anybody's capable of looking at the world through, but that requires you to decide to pay attention.
And that is so important. And I want to start encouraging people to pay attention, because otherwise you will just become, this also from your class, I remember you said you don't want to be a sheeple.
No sheeple.
No sheeple.
But it's so fun. It's so fun to think. Like it's just a brilliant thing, and it doesn't damage anybody. And by the way, it's a dangerous world we're living in now, particularly post-COVID with social media. There are almost these signals that come out where you, as a strategist, okay? You know what's about to hit you is manipulated.
Yeah.
When someone says the scientists all agree, like that for you is warning, warning, I'm about to hear a half-truth at best. Because that's just not what science is.
No.
They're trying to market it. They're trying to convince you, right? I mean, and it's the best thing in the world if BMW can convince you that they're the ultimate driving machine. Is that BMW? Great. If they can do that in one commercial, well, you're a sheep.
Of course.
Because you're like,
but
well,
you're also their best customer.
That's right.
And that's what the marketers do. And
Right.
I studied marketing.
And so I'm not saying yes. And
Yeah.
it's not that marketing is a bad thing.
No.
It's a good thing. But you, as on the other end of this information, you need to be an educated consumer of information. And if you're going to pull the trigger because you want the ultimate driving machine, please do a little research. Don't just go and buy an $80,000 BMW. Maybe it's your dream car. Maybe it works out. Nothing against BMWs. But that's their job. Their job is to hotwire how humans work.
Yeah.
And humans, you know, they have a tendency to not want to be in confusion or pain. And they have a tendency to want to pre-digest these things. And the marketing people are really smart.
Right now, they're getting way too good. They're getting way too good. And that's why we need to step our game up in a way.
Right.
Like, we need to become trend analysts and strategic thinkers so that we don't just become part of the
Yeah, and
the robots in a way.
be a skeptic, a happy skeptic, I call it,
Skeptic.
which is, and this is great because you can learn a lot if you have this attitude, which is, let's say you meet somebody and you're talking about the events of the day, whatever it might be, and you say, boy, that's interesting, tell me more, right? Now, you might agree with them, in which you'd say, like right now we have all these divisions, like political divisions and all this stuff going on. That's all put on us, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
But if someone you disagree with is willing to talk to you, or they say, oh yes, this is how I voted, or this is what I think about this really hot social issue, okay? You say, boy, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more? And when you ask somebody that, you can very quickly find out if there's anything, if they're just a talking head, that someone told them, or if they really understand the issue in the context of the issue. And you'll find that most people have no idea. Most people are simply repeating things other people have told them.
Yeah.
And if you endeavor to be strategic, those people, as I say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. You remember I talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. I mean, if the people choose, because it's their choice, if they choose to operate that way in the world, that's great. But if you choose to be thoughtful and think about these things, it's not that you're going to use it against it. It's not that you're creepily manipulating everything. But you're just going to have a better outcome over the course of hundreds of decisions in your life if you start to become thoughtful. And you can bet your bottom dollar that when you get a message that's been paid to hit your brain or your eyes or your ears, they're trying to short circuit your independent thinking.
Yeah.
By definition.
But they're also stealing your meaning away, like the way that you put meaning into things.
That's right. And it's up to you, which is why now we have the government saying, well, you can't hear that. We're trying to protect you from this message. It's not safe for you.
Yeah.
Like what? Like what?
Let me decide.
Now, we're a little bit privileged in the United States, but the reality is that no, that's not your job to tell me what that's my job if I choose to.
Yes, of course.
And the reason they're doing that is because because they have a strategy and most people do not.
Yeah.
Most people are just trying to get through the day. They're just trying to live their life and bring meaning to their life. And they're not thinking about it strategically. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as far as the trend analysis as far as the skill of trend analysis that I know that you have, what is a trend that you currently see that's going to come and hit us, and with the train analogy even? Like, what are the trains that I should be looking out for? Is it AI? Is it another type of technology?
Yeah, and I'm not a hardcore technologist, but I see technologies that impact how people operate, and there are many. But I see AI is a huge, and I know just from some of my business associations that AI is changing everything. And it's out of the barn, and it's not coming back.
Yeah.
And it's a technology that no one can control, meaning there's no government that can protect you from it because it's out there. And there are people that are evil and people that are good and people that want to leverage it to take your money and people that want to leverage it to change the world in a positive way. They're all out there. But it is out there and it's changing everything. Peer-to-peer technologies, things like Bitcoin, which are monetizing a network that is outside of the control of sovereign governments, is a huge thing. And when those 3 or 4 things converge, it's changing literally everything in a way that, and I've heard people, this is not my original idea, but I think it's true. There's not been this much change injected into a fairly connected world ever. I mean, this is the Gutenberg Bible. This is the printing press times 1,000.
Yeah.
This is the automobile moving from horses to automobiles or airplanes times 1,000. And so robotics connected via networked AI, it's going to change everything.
Yeah.
And so, and it changes it. Do you remember I do in the class, and this is not my idea either, but you say if you have a piece of paper, like technology adopts logarithmically.
Yes, you've told me exponential growth.
Exponential growth. And we're really bad at logarithmic growth because we're like two-dimensional. We're three-dimensional, but we live in a two-dimensional plane.
Yeah.
And math with a lot of zeros is hard for people, okay? And so you say, well, if I take a piece of paper that's a millimeter thick and I double it every day, if I take a piece of paper and fold it, it's a millimeter, 2 millimeters, 4, 8, 16. If I fold that paper 50 times, how tall is my stack of paper? And the answer is 112 million kilometers. So it's past the sun. And I just folded it 8 times.
Yeah.
But if you keep folding it another 42 times, it's past the sun. And that's logarithmic growth. And that's how networks grow. Okay, Moore's law, that's how networks grow. That's how technology adopts. We saw it with cell phones. You see it with lots of other things. And most technologies now that are going to change humanity are digital technologies that grow in a networked way. And so even if you don't see it coming yet, it's almost too late. If it's out there and it's starting the adoption curve, and if you don't think about what that might mean for my career or my future, there's almost nothing you can do but get out of the way.
Get out of the way of the train.
Get off the tracks.
Yes.
Like, don't be taking any naps on the tracks, right? Because it's coming, and it's coming at a relentless speed, and it's going to keep coming. And there's nothing, you can't regulate it away. You can't hope it doesn't exist. You just have to figure out how to adopt it. And it changes in a lot of ways AI in my very non-scientific way of thinking about it. It changes how we think about learning things. Like in my generation, if you wanted to learn something, you could buy some books, you could study, be autodidactic and focus on these things. And in a period of time, depending on what you were trying to learn, with some self-discipline, you could understand the thing. Like you could understand the components of the thing. AI and some of these technologies are moving so fast that even the elite people that are on the cutting edge, it's changing so fast that whatever they think they know today, in 30 days is no longer valuable.
Wow.
And so the idea is not that you're going to become an expert at studying the thing in the book way. It's that you are going to be an expert at adopting and leveraging curiosity.
In real time.
In real time.
Yeah.
How might I think about leveraging this? I don't need to understand vector databases. Okay, if you want to, great, but you don't have to. But you don't ignore this because it's changing everything.
Yeah.
And so in the next 5 years, it's literally, I mean, I think people talk about it. I suspect it's going to happen. I mean, I have a tendency to think change happens faster than it does, but companies are thinking about how do we adopt this and how do we think about it. And it's changed so fast that I think a lot of old world power structures or corporate structures are not going to be capable of adopting the change that will allow them to continue with controlling the resources they control it's going to spin so fast that the sharp young marketing people are just going to leave the company and start up a company doing marketing, and with 1 or 2 people do what the 27 people in your division did 3 months ago, because you understand AI. And if the company doesn't adopt that, their competitors are going to be doing
obsolete, irrelevant.
Yeah, the whole company. They're not going to be competitive anymore.
Yeah.
And so I would be really excited as a young person for like knowing that no one knows. This is the internet times 10 from 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. That's so exciting, but so
it's
scary.
really exciting. It's scary, but when you adopt the fact that it's unknowable, because it's the future, and you say, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and get busy, because it's unknowable. Nobody understands this, right? The only reason somebody might have a better perspective about the impact 20 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 3 years from now, is that they came into the riddle today with more experience, because they've thought about, they understand their business and how it works better than you do, or they understand certain things. And that's very optimistic, because all young people can choose tomorrow what to do with your 24 hours.
Yeah. Well, from that perspective of like a personal environmental scan, what would be the risk of not taking the time or putting your focus and your limited resources in understanding what's going on? What are the risks that you see as a young person?
Boy, that's tough. So all these things are probabilistic to some degree. The risk is that you lead a fairly uneventful life. And that might be okay for a lot of people. Like, I have to be careful how I talk about this, because a lot of people just want to, they want to add value where they have value and have a job and a nice family life, and that's what they want. And so, you know, you don't want to say risk in a negative way. But if you want to make a difference in the world, you should be thinking about, because it's going to impact everything. If you want to make a difference in the world and there's something you care about, you want to start thinking about, how are these technologies going to change how this thing that I care about might look 5 years from now, and do the thinking like that. And so the risk is you're always behind or missing out, and you're never really on the leading edge, which could be fine.
Yeah, it could be fine.
When you get older, like I am, maybe, you're like, okay, I've run my race. I just,
Yeah, no, of course.
I'm all talk and no do. Like, I just want to inspire my students to do this. But the truth is, you want to be curious. And the curiosity, there's so much, we spoke about this earlier, as it relates to going into a library. Like, I sense a lot of students are, they look things up and they find one thing and then they write a paper or whatever. And it's like, no, it's not even close to what you need to be doing. And I think about these things all the time, because I want to, make an impact. I'm here to make an impact on students. And it struck me that, like, when I travel and I go into famous libraries, 200-year-old libraries with millions of volumes of books, and it's like a temple. And the physicality of being around books, I think, has been lost. Because being around all these books forces you to deal with the fact that there are so many people in the world that know all kinds of things, and you don't know any of it. And you just can't deny it anymore. It's not like I know it because I can just get it on my phone. It's like these people spent their whole lives, and then they figured out someone to publish it. And they've distilled it down into a book, and there are millions of them. And I could go and pick any book off the shelf of this library, and I would learn something. Now, you tell me what you know.
Nothing at that point.
Nothing. And how exciting is that? Because anything you do to attempt to learn and change your kaleidoscope will give you a perspective that when you look at the challenges of the future, or the challenges you want to engage with, it'll give you context that no other person has. And that's business level strategy, right? I want to be differentiated. I don't want to just bring the same perspective to the problem as everybody else, right? Because the problems we're solving are not problems that have answers in chapter 3 of a book. They might require you to understand those things, but how you think about them and put them together, and your ability to deploy those, you execute on your plan, are what will make a difference. And I think young people, I do sense this in spades. Young people want to make a difference. They want whatever it is that they care about. It's great, and they want to make a difference in that space. So if you want to do that, you need to be thinking ahead, not just last week or last year or what the book says.
Yeah.
How do I leverage these new things that are happening?
Yeah, making assumptions, right?
Yes, you have
Even if
to.
they might be wrong, just based on what you know.
Right, and they are wrong. They're all wrong.
That's the other
All models are wrong. Some are useful. That's an old saying in our space, right?
Yeah.
Have a model, and be curious enough to interrogate and investigate all your assumptions deeply, not superficially. Deeply.
Investigate your own assumptions.
Yes.
Yes.
And I've seen this, hey, the world is freezing to death, the way the ozone layer is dying, the world is overheating, the world now it's weather change. Like, they just make stuff up over and over again, and the people that believe this, and if you do, that's fine, they don't know anything about environmental science. Like, they're just saying what they've heard. Yeah. And the people promoting that put them in fear. The same thing they did with terrorism, the same thing they did with the economic crisis, the same thing they did with COVID. It's the same thing. And there is nothing new under the sun. Human nature has not changed in 5,000 years.
Yeah, well, the response to fear is so great, I think it's one of the strongest ones that puts you in that state of quick reaction.
Just tell me, the Hegelian dialectic, have you heard of that?
No. What is that?
There was a German philosopher, Hegel, who he came up with the Hegelian dialectic. You've got a thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. And people know that humans operate in a certain way. And so if they can get you off guard, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Like, if they can change and put you in a position of fear, then they can offer a service that solves your fear. And how nice is that?
How lovely.
If you were a security company, it would be nice if you could just rattle up some theft in the neighborhood, right? You would have a lot more people interested in your service.
Yeah, a good strategy from their part in a way.
Big business,
Yeah.
government, they need people to follow the rules.
Yeah.
And so if they can create uncertainty and doubt and fear in people, then they can propose rules that benefit them and they do not benefit you. And it's the same thing, and it's been going on for thousands of years, by the way, if you study military strategy.
And that's why, that's the risk to me. Yes, you can have a very normal life, but the things that you consider normal could be taken away from you if you're not, understanding what's going on. That's what I feel.
All the time.
Like a threat.
We just had to deal with the FISA legislation that got renewed for another period of time, where the government can, without a warrant, just hoover up all the information from anybody. And the reason they do this, and it's always the same, once you see this and you know how this works, you will be a better strategist. They interview the senator and they'll say, "Oh yeah, but I was just in a conference meeting that was high security, and so I can't talk about it. But man, if you saw what I saw, we need to have all this information or people are going to die."
Yeah, everybody freaks out.
Okay, right. Okay. That's the excuse they use for everything.
Yeah.
You don't know, pretty person, that's nice. You go back and keep working, right? And young people are like, they should be saying, time out. Let me think critically about these things. Let's really talk about it.
Yeah.
The world is not necessarily a safe place, but to have these people, and the power always goes one way, always, with big business and with governments.
Yeah, it really does. But as long as you're comfy, right? That's what you're exchanging.
Yeah,
your freedom for comfort.
I don't think I did this exercise a few years ago when you were in my class, but I do it now, where we look up who has the majority position in all these big companies. And
that one's always a good one.
They're there are 9 or 10 companies that basically have, significant interest in every company. And so they own Target and they own Walmart.
Yeah.
And do they really compete? I mean, the owners are the same.
Yeah.
Well, or is it just is it a theater of competition, or is it what's really going on here?
It's scary how that's applied to way more than just business too.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not political. The media, there are 10 or 12 companies that own all major media outlets globally.
Yeah.
And both sides, if you want to take a side, it's all the same. You're going to get at best half. And the intention of them feeding you that information as a half portion is manipulation.
Yeah. But you need to be smarter than that.
You need to be smarter and say,
It's your
boy,
job.
it's your job.
Right.
Well, I would hope.
Right.
And you can't fight every battle too.
Yeah.
That's why you need to know yourself.
That's fair.
Because you could get overwhelmed doing a deep dive on this stuff. You've got to decide, this is an important decision. Let me look into this for these reasons, based on how you've assessed where you want to be in your life.
Yeah.
But that's the decision you get to make as the CEO of your life, that no one else gets to make, right?
Yeah, that's another thing that you taught me in your class, was like, you're the CEO of your life. Even if you don't have a business ever, that's you. You have to do the critical thinking, because you have to decide where you're going. And wherever you end up, 100% you and your fault.
Yeah, it's interesting that you could take something like corporate strategy and turn it into a you, but it is. You're a corporation. You've got multiple interests in your life, and they're competing for your time. What do you do next?
Yeah, how do
That's
you manage
pure
the
corporate
resources?
strategy.
Yeah.
That's all that is. Every hour you put here is an hour you can't put there.
Yeah, the opportunity.
And by the way, you never get the hour back. And so the thousands of decisions you make with your time over your lifetime, and what you choose, hopefully you choose consciously.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to choose to spend an hour learning about this new thing that I didn't know existed until I was curious. Take an hour, and I guarantee you, when you go back to your daily grind, you will look at what you do daily in a different way, because it's changed your kaleidoscope. I learned something new, I've thought about it, I've plugged it into my worldview, and now it's changed, hopefully to your benefit. It's changed how I think about things, because I'm a different person.
Yeah, and you're conscious about the change.
Yeah, and you're aware that you've made those changes.
Yeah.
And so, it really is, it's really quite an optimistic time. It's a cool time to be alive. It can be very scary, because it's forcing change on the young people who, in school, we create a program where if you can pass this test, and you go to third grade, and then you learn this, and you go to fourth grade, and we've created a system where everyone wants to be right only. And they want to consume stuff and then prove they're right. And then we dump them out into the world where there is no right answer. The things they care deeply about
no rubric.
are going to happen in the future, and are impacted in manifold ways by stuff you've never studied, you're not aware of. Now go win. And young people are like, whoa, right? And the system doesn't want to create a bunch of uppity young people that are really smart and clever and creative, that are trying to change the world. Because remember, in my class I talk about, when you're the king of the hill, you really have to be paranoid, because everyone's coming for your territory.
Yeah.
That's Sun Tzu, right? You got to. So when you are doing really well, like, be super paranoid. There's not time to lay back and relax. Now's the time to be concerned, because you are achieving above average returns, or you're making a big difference, and everybody that wants to compete with you is trying to figure out, what are you doing that they can adopt to help dislodge you?
Yeah.
Because it's competition.
Yeah.
And
it's
so
healthy competition.
Yeah, and so you have to be hyper paranoid then. And so a lot of people say, well, I'll just stay here, and I never really want to be here, because that seems like a lot of work. And you're like, yeah, it's a lot of work, but you know what? It's really fulfilling if you just have the attitude of being curious and being willing to do the digging. Be willing to do the work. And it doesn't have to be hard work, because now information, it's so easy to get it.
Yeah.
It's so easy versus the old days. And just pursue stuff that you're passionate about. Get a job, of course. Figure out how to make some money, but stay a free agent mentally. And and there's so many opportunities for young people. And I think some of the shifts geopolitically that are going on in our financial system, that's a whole nother podcast probably we could talk about. But all of those changes and shifts are happening simultaneously at a rate that's significant.
Yeah.
And so you just hold on and enjoy the ride, and just be okay not having total control. But try to make sense of all the things you're pursuing, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be something deploy some of your resource doing something that you are passionate about. That's cool, some of it. But we all can't have every job we do be something we're just wildly passionate about. Sometimes, but then you're going to go and learn something. As long as you're being a responsible person and working for a company and being curious, like, why are they asking me to do this? And this is really interesting. Every time you do that, you're changing your kaleidoscope, which makes you more valuable to your next job or your future, or you've learned something that you don't want to do again, right? And gain from failure. And people talk about this all the time, but it's really true.
Yeah. You need to experience it. I think that's what you're getting at. It's like you need to go out there and live it to its fullest without being scared of it.
That's
or
right.
even if you're scared of it, doing it.
Well,
living it.
in pure strategic terms, it would be perhaps I want to be aware of things that I'm not totally confident are true. So as I start to engage in this battle, I can monitor those.
Yeah.
So that would be something we covered in class. It's like you've got an idea, but the battle starts, right? There's the famous Mike Tyson said, or someone said, everyone has a plan until Mike Tyson hits you in the nose, right? That's life.
Yeah.
Like, everyone has a plan.
The
plan. But what do you? Hey, maybe I don't have the customer service to back up my promises. Okay. You say I better be hyper aware of how well I'm serving my clients to make sure that, because I'm probably not best of class, I can do more. Let me monitor that so it doesn't get out of control. So you can make those changes because you're aware of it. That'd be an example of you being aware of a weakness you have, right?
Being okay with it.
And trying to plan around that weakness.
All right. Yeah. How are we doing on time, Logan?
We're probably way over
doing
time.
13 more minutes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Because I wanted you to introduce yourself a little bit more about who you are. Because although yes, you're my professor, you're like my favorite one. It would be cool for people to know that you have a background in strategy.
I have a background.
And like the other thing that I did want to say was like, I know that you only teach in GCU because you want to. And that was something that impacted me as well. Because you're here not because you need to be here, but because you want to be here. And that's why your teachings are so valuable. Because you're here to help. You're here because you love it. There's a passion behind that.
Right. Well, so philosophically, and you can cut the video, but philosophically, it's one of the things I've learned, the hard way, and I try to make students aware of casting pearls, if you will. The students can pick them up or not; it's up to them. But when you can get to the point in your life when you can do things because you want to, not because you need to, it's transformational.
Yeah, it really is.
It's transformational. And so that's a very complicated thing. It depends on your cost of living and the choices you make and, how big is your family. If I had 12 kids, I wouldn't, I would need to work. And so you make lots of decisions in your life. And in my life, I was probably 30 years old. I wasn't smart enough to figure any of this out, by the way, when I was in my 20s. There's no way. This is all I really do is basically teach my previous self what I wish someone taught me. That's really, and it happens through the lens of strategy, which is brilliant because strategy is so overarching. But so in my 20s, I was fortunate enough to be associated with much older, successful people, and I played a key role with those folks and had the opportunity to do business at a pretty high level. In other countries, and I had traveled as a young person, and I come from a really strong family, and privileged, if you will. But doing business, gave me a lot of humility for the people that seeing other people operating at a level that maybe I wasn't capable of operating at, and starting to learn where my weaknesses really were, and all those kinds of things. But in my 20s, when most of my friends were running around doing crazy stuff that people do in their 20s, I was too busy by good fortune and luck to work for a couple of much older, very well respected partners who were bringing me along with them doing all these things. And they weren't going to the bar on Saturday night, and they weren't doing silly things with their money. And this was in the real estate development space.
Nice.
And commercial real estate. And so when I worked through the roaring 20s, the area where people get into all kinds of trouble and get married, divorced, and have kids, and all those crazy things, I was too busy doing interesting things that I was fortunate enough to like to do. And I popped out of the other side of that, and it was, I can remember the second this happened, and I looked around, and my friends are like, yeah, the bank foreclosed on my house on Camelback Mountain, and I've got a paternity suit, and now I'm getting a divorce from my third wife, and I've had 6 cars, 6 Mercedes at the junkyard that I crashed, or like they've wasted that time.
Yeah.
But because I was fortunate enough to be under the guidance of people who were older and didn't do that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of looked around when I was 30, and I thought, well, dang, like I can do a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I realized I needed to learn. Like I went back to school, and I got a master's degree. By the way, this is an interesting story. Because the goal of education is to learn so you can make a difference outside of school. There's no scenario where your grade is what the goal is in a class, right? If you're in school, it should be to learn to make a difference in some way that you think will be valuable in the future. Like going to college is a very strategic thing. Yeah. And students that just care about their grade are totally missing the whole purpose of this. And so I said, wow, all these people, what were the commonality of all these people that were really impressive people that I had the opportunity to meet? And they all were smarter by far. They all had access to information. They worked internationally. They were multicultural. They just had stuff that when I looked at myself in the mirror, I thought, boy, I need to get some of that, and fast. And so that's when I went back to get a graduate degree. So I went to Thunderbird. At the time, it was the #1 international business school, and it was in town, which was great. I think I got accepted into Wharton as well. It was quantitative, but I didn't really want to be a quant guy. I wanted to be a soft skills guy. I wanted to be and that was transformational, because there were people in my class, I think I'm probably going to misstate the stat, but I think there were people from 62 countries.
Wow.
In my class at the time. This was back in the heyday. And you could sit around doing a case study of a very complex business thing like we do in MBA programs, and the people had totally different answers to the challenges.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, that really opens you up when you start to realize that the world is not, there's no easy right answer to any of these things. And so I had the opportunity to do that, and I got out, and then I was working in Mexico. I had the opportunity to do other businesses in other Latin American areas, and that was all a huge adventure, like in ways I probably couldn't talk about on film. But you learn a lot about how the world really works, and it's not what you think it is.
Yeah. And that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah. It's certainly okay. And so doing those different, I had civil engineering and, owned restaurants and commercial office buildings and shopping centers and golf courses. We did a bunch of those things and just all kinds of crazy stuff. By the way, what I learned about that was, that would be a lesson for young people, is be better at choosing a focus. Because you only have so much time.
Yeah.
And I had I don't regret, but I had a lot of things going on.
Yeah, what were the runner-uppers for you?
Well, I was a partner in a law firm in Mexico, and I'm not even a lawyer, right? And because one of the lawyers stole a bunch of money from me. That's another story. But all these experiences, basically, it was all these experiences that I had. And then after the financial crisis in 2008, the dust was settling, and I was still standing. I had a pretty conservative life and lifestyle, and I had a plane, but I didn't have a jet. I'm a pilot.
Nice.
And I thought, do I really want to get back in that game? Or do I want to simplify my life? And so, that was the process of starting to simplify and do some other things. And then I had someone said, hey, do you want to be an adjunct and teach a class? I thought, well, I literally, before they asked, I hadn't spent 1 second in my entire life thinking about being a teacher.
Wow.
Not 1 second.
But did you say yes in that second?
I said, it's an experience, and I'm all about experience. Enjoy the ride. Let me go try. So I went, and I taught a class, and then maybe the next semester I had a couple classes. Then GCU was growing, and I had the opportunity to do it full time. And then it was a 5 or 10 year path where I was trying to figure out, and I almost like tapped out the first few years because I just didn't feel like I was making an impact. I was clearly sharing these things, and was content. By the way, what I wanted to share was my master's degree. Like, it never earned me a penny. It didn't get me a date. I mean, it never nothing. I did it because I wanted to learn, right? Until the opportunity to teach came up, and they said, "Oh, by the way, do you have an MBA?" And I said, "Yes." Check the box. Okay, here's right. That's life. Like,
That's
you
wild.
don't know. You don't know. 25 years later, someone says, if you have an MBA, you can teach a class.
All right.
And that sent me on a path that changed, right? And so now I have to, the first 5 years, it was hard to communicate. Like all these complex ideas, and which is where I came, the kaleidoscope and the snowball. I have all these little stories. The rear view mirror. I have all these stories I tell to try to to have younger people understand the context of some of the things. But the strategy is interesting because every business in every country I've done has the same challenges, and strategy unifies it all. The things you're picking out, the things you're analyzing are different in all cases, but the tool set, it's like having a master mechanics tool set when you're a strategy person. It's like, okay, I've got the tools, let me see if this one helps me with this problem, right? And so because I had the opportunity to apply those tools in so many different ways, service business, lawyer, restaurant, real estate, they're the same tool, but when you apply them in different contexts, they're very, very useful. And so that's why I'm such a big advocate for strategy, because strategy is universally helpful. If you're willing to engage, if you're willing to try, and the only cost is whatever calories your brain takes. Because 98% of it is thinking. Carefully. And that's fun to me. Not everyone agrees.
No, I'd agree. And just so you know, you're very impactful. You're impacted.
I had it worked out by the time I had you. I had figured out some of those things. I'm still not everyone's favorite, but that's okay.
They'll get there, don't worry. But anyway, thank you so much for being
You're
here
welcome.
and joining us in the podcast.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else that...
Well, I will add Kaizen. So my other passion is project management. And so I
yes.
love the name of your podcast.
Evolve
And
daily.
it's exactly right. It's very agile. We do a lot of project management stuff. And I will just share this. If strategy is understanding the parts and pieces of a structure, if you're building a bridge, okay, you've got steel and concrete and bolts. Those are what strengths do we have? How am I going to leverage this? How am I going to leverage my strengths to get to the other side of the river, okay? The project management piece is what's the art of putting those things, executing. Now that you have a plan, you have to execute.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Action.
And so I love Kaizen because that's the process of plan, do, check, act, and you go through the Deming loop and you figure out how do you improve and how do you learn from yesterday. And that's if people can embrace that concept and just, be less wrong. People say, I think
baby tweaks.
some Swami, like way smarter than I, had said, like, my goal in life is the day I die to be less wrong than I am today. Like, if I can only be less wrong every day, then my life has been successful. But there's a lot to that, because it lets you know that people accept failure.
Yeah, like it's okay to fail.
When it's okay to fail, then it's okay to try. As long as you're ingesting what you learn and thinking about it and improving what you do.
Reiterating it.
So that's a great name for your podcast. Hopefully it grows tremendously.
Yeah. No, and we'll have you back. I'm sure there's got to be a part 2. You have to tell me about your conspiracy theories. But yeah, thank you so much, Professor Waterman, or Paul.
Paul, you're welcome. It's so great to see you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course.